is All India Radio. In the weekly program Current Affairs, we now bring you a discussion on outcome of 19th Congress of Communist Party of China and its implications for India. The participants are Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar, Security Analyst, Professor Swaran Singh of Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Simran Sodhi, journalist who initiates and moderates the discussion.
We are discussing the outcome of the 19th Congress of the Communist Party in Beijing, which saw the re-election of the Chinese President Xi Jinping. It also starts the beginning of what is being called as the new era, and also the domination of Xi Jinping not only at the helm of China, but also some would point out at the helm of global affairs. He is also being referred to as the most influential leader globally today. Professor Singh, when you see the outcome of what has happened in China and we see the many analyses that has been written around the globe, one thing which is strikingly standing out is the fact that people are now saying that this is a new era which sees Xi Jinping at the helm of not only the affairs of China but maybe global affairs. Would you go that far? Would you agree with that analysis?
There is some truth in saying that Xi Jinping is clearly the most powerful leader as far as China is concerned. And yes, to some extent, most influential leader around the world, especially because of Donald Trump's withdrawal from several international institutions, starting with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, now to recently to UNESCO, Paris Treaty on Climate Change. So in that sense, increasingly talk about a vacuum, and that is where Xi Jinping would step in perhaps. But most of the analysts are seeing this in terms of changing personnel who are the leaders in China, and that new leadership being choice of Xi Jinping. I want to underline the bigger change that has happened in this week-long 19th Party Congress is to amend the party constitution to include what is being called Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era. Now, only two leaders had this great distinction of their name being put as part of their philosophies being mentioned in the constitution. These two are Mao and Deng Xiaoping. In these two leaders also, the mention was on Mao's thought and Deng Xiaoping's theory, and people understand a clear hierarchy between mention of thought and theory. And in case of Xi Jinping, it is the mention of Xi Jinping thought. So people are comparing him today clearly not with Deng Xiaoping but with Mao Zedong, who was a founder of the new Communist Republic here. And the last point briefly, even Mao did not get this kind of honorific when he was still in position of power. So this is unusual that a leader who is still serving gets such an unusual kind of honor. And that means that increasingly now, questioning Xi Jinping, at least in China, would be questioning rule of Communist Party.
Commodore Bhaskar, as Professor Singh has pointed out about the rise of Xi Jinping, and we've seen a lot of people, one analyst I was reading goes so far as to suggest that this was actually the coronation of Emperor Xi Jinping. Would you give a lot of weightage to the fact that the Chinese affairs today are being held over or are being governed by a man whose own personality is very strong, and this strong leadership is going to see an even more aggressive China, a stronger, more assertive China, not only in its relationships with India, but in its relations with the entire world?
Two aspects here. One is the use of the word coronation. I have also seen some reference to this, the manner in which now, as Professor Singh points out, he has entered not just the Chinese lexicon in terms of the interpretation of Marxism with or socialism with Chinese characteristics, but also the Chinese canon almost, meaning that in the pantheon of Chinese leaders, it's almost like saying, forget coronation, it's like the canonization. And you have the equivalent of Saint Xi Jinping, if I may put it in a slightly irreverent manner. But I think more seriously, the reality is that Mr. Xi Jinping, as president, as chairman of the CMC and the numero uno in the party, has accorded unto himself a degree of power that we have not seen. And I think there is a deeper conceptual point here that it is a repudiation, if I may use that word, of what Deng Xiaoping had advocated, which is the collective leadership. Now, there's a very interesting kind of indicator of this. I gather that in the leading paper of China, the PLA, the Daily if I'm not mistaken, they had the visual, the picture of Mr. Xi Jinping in a very dominant way, which had not been done in the past when we had the transition to Mr. Jiang Zemin as also to Mr. Hu Jintao, and the other 6 members of the apex body, the Politburo, have moved into the inside pages. So this is just an indicator, but in China, I believe these are very significant indicators. Now, the second part of what you asked, what does this mean? To put it in summary, in Twitter form almost, I would say that the likelihood of a more assertive China, which is going to project itself as the equivalent of now definitely the Asian leader, waiting to have or assume the global mantle, is a high probability. But I want to add one caveat here. You started the discussion with this question about, is he the influential global leader that some sections of the Chinese media make him out to be? I'd say no. This is an image that he is projecting. But if you look at the global stage today, and maybe in the course of our discussion we can revisit this and say, what is the metric of an influential global leader? I would perhaps draw attention to President Obama over the last few years as quote-unquote an influential global leader. I don't think Mr. Xi Jinping qualifies as of now. He has the intent, but whether he'll get there, to my mind, is a big question mark.
Professor Singh, taking this discussion maybe closer to home, when you see the India-China relationship, and we've seen that in the recent past, we've had a lot of issues between the two nations. There's, of course, been Doklam. Apart from that, the issue of the Dalai Lama keeps surfacing now and then, and we have boundary issues when it comes to Arunachal. Do you see the fact that today Xi Jinping is back and he seems to be a much stronger personality than we have seen the recent, or he's stronger than his predecessors? Do you then foresee a smoother relationship, or do you feel that hiccups like these will continue because China really doesn't want any competition, at least in Asia? It sees itself as the Asian leader and in the near future as the global leader.
There's always comparison between China and India, even in terms of leaders. In fact, we are now in a world of alpha male leaders, strong leaders in that sense, whether it is Vladimir Putin, who's ruling Russia from way back 1999, or Erdogan in, let us say, Turkey. You have Filipino president, you have several leaders like that. So Xi Jinping is, in that sense, very trendy, strong leader, defender of Chinese core interests. And that is where India gets into the picture. In his opening address, he clearly, firmly underlined and the fact that he is very conscious of protecting Chinese sovereignty and territorial sovereignty in that sense. And if you read that along with the fact that he is talking about the People's Liberation Army being completely mechanized as soon as 2020 and being modernized as a global force by 2035, that means that there is a focus on hard power. Though he also spoke of use of soft power, Chinese culture, etc., etc. But if you look at what has happened since he took over the reins of power in China with India, we have had one after another border incidents, except that we have every time managed through diplomatic dialogue to resolve them. And last 3 summit meetings of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping always reflected a positive body language, and there is now something called Astana Consensus, which talks about differences not being allowed to turn into disputes. So in that sense, I think a certain tension might continue vis-a-vis India. But as Commodore Bhaskar said, in that sense, Xi is emerging and at least trying to emerge as a global leader as well. So his engagements are going to be far more widespread to allow him exclusive focus on India. And that also puts global scrutiny on him in that sense. So there are both going to be pluses and minuses. But I don't see very easy relationship with China in coming years, particularly because Xi Jinping now is no longer assuming himself to be as a peer leader as far as India is concerned. He's looking much beyond Asia now.
Commodore Bhaskar, I would like to talk a little about his pet project, the One Belt, One Road project. The initiative has seen a lot of resistance from India. India has officially said that this violates India's sovereignty, territorial rights. Xi Jinping seems very keen on the project. He sees this as a revival of Chinese old power, the old Chinese kingdom. And in his opening speech, which was more than 3 hours long, he did refer to the China dream. So, do you feel there will be more pressure on India to join this initiative? And is there really an option for countries like India to stay away? As One Belt, One Road, we've seen almost all the powers are kind of towing his line today.
Regarding the One Belt, One Road, I think we need to recall that it had been what you might call as a high priority for President Xi Jinping. When we got the first hint of this, when he had spoken in Indonesia, where he had outlined this equivalent of a maritime vision. And from there, the transition to the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative, and as you rightly pointed out, the fact that it has got included in his speech when he spoke for about 203 or 205 minutes is a reiteration of the high priority that President Xi Jinping personally accords to this particular project, and he seems to have linked it with the equivalent of the realization of the Chinese dream. Meaning, this is a very ambitious project, because I often say that if you look at the fine print of the BRI, it is a vision, and we are trying to fit, when I say we, led by Mr. Xi Jinping, he expects the global community to be part of this hub and spokes, and it is perhaps the most ambitious project we have seen, which connects rail, road and sea, and opening up a whole new vista of connectivity that in turn hopefully will lead to greater trade. So that is the visionary aspect, because a lot of skeptics say that where is the trade? You might have all this connectivity, but who is going to provide this trade? And the most cynical ask about Balochistan, saying that if you invest in Gwadar, how is this trade coming into Gwadar that would in a way justify this huge investment? These are question marks. But my reading is that yes, President Xi Jinping has put his personal stamp on this, if you will. Therefore, there would be a certain amount of pressure come expectation from India. Because at the moment, India is really the only major country that has deliberately distanced itself. It is not even like the United States and Japan, which at one stage were politically, shall we say, not supportive, but merely to ensure that President Xi Jinping did not lose face, they sent high officials for the summit in Beijing. India did not even do that. And that was a very clear and I would say a decision that had been arrived at after a lot of consideration, which means India is also signaling that we take our objections very seriously. But the most interesting aspect to me is that over the last few weeks, literally, you can see some murmurs in many capitals. We have seen this coming from Australia. We have seen this coming in the neighborhood from Sri Lanka. We have seen it coming from Pakistan, questioning the economic viability about entering into this kind of a BRI initiative with China, because the fine print seems to suggest that whatever is being given as an investment will be a long-term loan. It is not a grant. It is not aid. So which means that there will be some payback time. So I think the Indian focus on the economic viability, how equitable is it to the smaller country, and finally, how environmentally compatible is it? These are kind of questions that are now being raised. So I think I would say that while the Belt Road Initiative is very ambitious, realizing it might be more difficult than what is currently being anticipated is how I would qualify.
Professor Singh, to carry this thought forward, and if we were to focus on Pakistan, we've also seen that Pakistan today looks more and more like a satellite state of China. There's this huge investment which China has made under this ambitious project into Pakistan. The relations between the two nations are there for everyone to see. Every time we go to the UN when we want a certain thing done, China is there ready with its veto to protect Pakistan. Do you feel that in this regional politics that plays out, there's China, there's Pakistan, there's India. India is trying to somewhere raise global awareness of what Pakistan is doing. You have China always stepping up. Does it strengthen the China-Pakistan nexus vis-a-vis India?
I think definitely it does, because you often notice that it's only Chinese leaders who visit Pakistan. And both Prime Minister Li Keqiang and President Xi Jinping, both leaders have visited to Pakistan and announced this China-Pakistan economic corridor. As Commodore Bhaskar said, India decided not to participate in the BRI forum in May this year, but ignoring India's sensitivities, they decided to call CPEC as the flagship program or project of the whole BRI initiative. So on one side, we notice that continuous commitment, and if Xi Jinping becomes more powerful, that commitment is going to stay and maybe become far more stronger in coming times. But at the same time, we also can notice two things. One, that from initial propositions in Kazakhstan and Indonesia, Chinese have evolved and changed their view of what do they mean by Belt and Road Initiative. They are now increasingly focusing on consultation.